really know what I saw those years ago. These events happened sometime in the past and memories can change. However, some aspects are clearer in my mind than others. I worry that my mind filled in the gaps of the events that happened those years ago. Nevertheless, this is the story of what happened during the winter of my youth. I lived in western Michigan, not too far from Lake Michigan, and in a deeply rural town. Fewer than 2,000 people resided in my hometown. I lived about 20 minutes away from civilization. While there were a few people, there were miles of rolling farmland and untamed forests that surrounded us, giving my father ample room to indulge his favorite hobby of hunting. I was never too interested in hunting myself. I felt it insulting to the majestic deer who lived on our property and frankly unfair whenever guns were involved. This was just one of the many differences between my father and I. Still, he did his best to involve me in his hobbies. That's how, despite hours of protesting, I was dragged into the woods with him and up a tree after school wearing full camo and holding his rifle and binoculars. My father scanned the surrounding woods and fields for any sign of activity. I won't. On the other hand, he was swaddled in a blanket and in a horribly uncomfortable lawn chair, not at all enjoying myself. While I love the woods and still do, I just wasn't interested in the evening activities. I originally started scanning the path, which we came from wondering if I could see our home tucked past all the trees. Stop squirming. Everything in the woods can hear you, my father said gruffly. I huffed in annoyance, but listened and opened my book, trying to get comfortable. It was later in the day, and the afternoon sun quickly turned to dusk. I had lost track of time and only began to pay attention to my surroundings when I was going to complain to my dad that it was becoming too dark to read. Looking up, I realized he had fallen asleep. I was first filled with annoyance that I had been brought to these cold, dark woods for my father's entertainment, only to have him fall asleep on me. But then a sudden mischievous curiosity overtook me. Binoculars, a rifle among other treasures were in front of me. My father's tools, which I was told never to touch, were within arm's length. And for the taking the gun was too intimidating. The binoculars, however, were too tempting to pass up. These were high-powered and very expensive pieces of equipment, but I snatched them up and turned to see if I could finally see my house. With their help, I searched through the countless tree branches and was about to give up when I saw movement. It was low to the ground, some dark brown furred animal that was shaking violently. I couldn't make out many details, and even though I saw antlers, it seemed unlike a deer. Deer were usually pretty calm and very distinguishable. I couldn't begin to guess what I was looking at, though. I eventually noticed it was two things. One of them was dead, the other not so much. I quickly guessed I was looking at two distinct creatures, one long dead deer carcass and some other animal that seemed to be dragging it through the woods. I have a habit of talking too much, and this came to bite me when I muttered, "What is that?" under my breath. The thing stopped moving. Suddenly, my heart skipped a beat as I kept looking at it. There was no way that thing had heard me. It was so far away, yet I saw those long ears perk up, and it turned to show its face. It was a canine thing, a long snout that tapered into a dark nose, sharp yellowish teeth that jutted out at awkward angles, and the most peculiar eyes, while it seemed to have no hair or have very short hair around its face. The part that stuck out to me were the eyes. They were a deep amber color, unnaturally illuminated in the low light, and they seemed to belong to an animal, even though I had no clue what I was looking at. It deeply unsettled me. Some voice in my head, even as a child, screamed this was not natural, and yet I was transfixed. I kept staring at it. Eventually, the creature stood still, then it turned to look up. I locked eyes or binoculars with this thing. It cocked its head slightly, and I was mesmerized by its cold gaze and unnatural grace. The hunched figure began to unfold itself, and I watched with disbelief as this canine entity began to stand on two forward. It was very tall, though how tall exactly, I couldn't say. It was thin, too. It looked emaciated, as I remember seeing rib bones through a thin hairy patch on its sides. The legs were bent at an awkward angle, and given how the creature hunched and held onto a tree trunk, I guessed that while I could stand up, it was one of the many unnatural aspects of the creature. I remember it was strange, and I dare say it had hands. The paws were unnaturally shaped with these spindly fingers that jutted out into its long claws. The worst part of the whole event was just the sense of understanding. I had a primal feeling that this creature knew I was up in the trees looking at it, that it understood completely what was going on, and I both knew that it could come get me whenever it wanted. This sense of overwhelming dread eventually led my shaking hands to drop my father's binoculars. The sharp noise shook the quiet woods as the glass of the binocular frames broke below. That one sound seemed to set off a chain reaction. I began to violently shake and started shouting for my dad to wake up. Dad, something's out there. We need to go home. I begged to his credit. He quickly woke up and took control of the situation. I explained what I saw and pointed to the general direction it was in. He reached for his binoculars and I sheepishly motioned to the ground. Sorry. He scoffed and looked down the hill that happened to lead toward our home. Seconds dragged by slowly until he finally looked down at me. It must have been a coyote, whatever it was. It isn't there now, Dad. It wasn't a coyote. I saw it. You spooked yourself, nothing more, he said, cutting me off. He looked around the surrounding woods and rubbed some sleep out of his eyes. Look, it's been long enough. Let's head back. Your mom must be worried sick. Dad, what if it's still out there? I demanded, stepping away from the trapdoor that led towards the exit in the dangerous woods. Just stop. Nothing is going to hurt you. Besides, I'll keep you safe, he said, motioning to his rifle. Now let's get home. There was no more pleading I could do. So I begrudgingly gave in. He went down the ladder first, and I quickly followed. I saw him shake his head when he saw the binoculars, and he picked up his ruined gear. Beginning the walk back home for me, it was an excruciating walk, and though my father tried making small talk, I was too worried. I scanned the trees and jumped at every sound. Thankfully, nothing stopped us, and we made it home safely. My father explained the events to my mother, and they both teased me for having an overactive imagination. I said nothing and just thought over the brief encounter. Over the few weeks that went between my first encounter and my second, I began to believe I was just seeing things. My father never saw evidence of anything when he went on various other hunts, and I pushed the thoughts away. Eventually, I forgot about the whole incident, although its eyes always bothered me. Even after the fact, they always felt a little too human. Some weeks later, I would get another encounter with this thing, and that encounter would permanently change how I saw the previous events in the world around me. Stay tuned for part 2.